What if the very thing that makes you nice is the same thing that destroys your power? Imagine a quiet room, the kind where every sound feels amplified, where your thoughts have nowhere to hide, and the soul stands unclothed beneath its own illusions. In that room sits a man who has spent his life doing everything right, the man who says yes when he wants to say no, the man who offers peace to people who offer him chaos, the man who apologizes for existing even when no sin has been committed. He is the modern nice guy, shaped by expectation, tamed by guilt, and disarmed by the belief that goodness alone is virtue. But across from him sits another presence, cold, ancient, carved from a far harsher stone, a mind sharpened by conflict, soaked in the failures of kings and the quiet betrayals of allies, a mind that sees human nature not as it should be, but as it is. The presence leans forward, his shadow stretching long across the floor, and in the dim candlelight, his voice becomes a whisper that feels like destiny unraveling. Niccolò Machiavelli speaks. He does not speak with kindness. He speaks with precision, like a surgeon cutting away gangrenous flesh. He speaks with the elegance of a man who has watched empires rise from courage and fall from cowardice. He speaks with the voice of a man who understood power not as theory, but as blood-soaked, betrayal-tested reality. And now his gaze rests on the modern nice guy, the man who has been told that decency guarantees love, that humility guarantees respect, that kindness guarantees safety, that patience guarantees reward. Machiavelli studies this man the way a strategist studies a battlefield, noting every weakness disguised as virtue, every insecurity masked by politeness, every moral facade built on fear rather than strength. The candle flickers, and Machiavelli's eyes narrow. "Your problem," he begins, "is not that you are good. Your problem is that you believe goodness alone has leverage." The air trembles with the weight of that truth. The nice guy flinches, because somewhere deep inside, hidden beneath the layers of appeasement and suppressed anger, a part of him already knows this. He knows that people often take more than he offers. He knows that being agreeable has not protected him from being overlooked. He knows that his silence has not shielded him from disrespect. He knows that when he bends, others lean, when he gives, others take, when he forgives too quickly, others sin again. But he has never allowed himself to admit what Machiavelli says: without mercy, his niceness is not morality, it is strategy, and it is a bad one. Machiavelli rises slowly, hands clasped behind his back, pacing the room like a general recounting a lost battle. His words flow with the hypnotic force of a river carving its way through stone. "You think people will see your heart," he says, "but people see your boundaries. You think people will value your honesty, but people value what they must work for. You think people will appreciate your loyalty, but people rarely appreciate what is freely given." The nice guy swallows hard, and in that moment, his entire life feels like a long hallway of memories echoing with instances where he was too soft, too patient, too forgiving, too willing to stand last in the line of his own priorities. He remembers the friends who used his generosity like currency. He remembers the lovers who left him because he lacked mystery, tension, or edge. He remembers the colleagues who took credit for his work while he smiled politely. He remembers every moment he betrayed himself under the illusion of being good. Machiavelli pauses beside him. He speaks again, voice low, steady, lethal in its clarity. "Being good is admirable. Being harmless is not. A lamb who tries to survive among wolves through kindness alone is not virtuous. He is dead." The nice guy feels something twist inside him. A truth he has avoided, feared, denied. For years he has clung to the belief that goodness must triumph, that suffering patiently will eventually yield reward, that enduring disrespect is somehow noble. But Machiavelli dismantles these illusions with the precision of a man who has spent a lifetime studying humanity without illusions. People do not respect what they do not fear losing. The sentence hangs in the room like a guillotine blade. Fear, losing, respect. These are not words the nice guy has allowed himself to use. He has lived his life trying to avoid conflict, not understanding that avoiding conflict is often the birthplace of bigger wars. He has mistaken tolerance for strength, compromise for connection, self-sacrifice for love. But in Machiavelli's eyes, these are not virtues, they are fractures. The candle flame dances, casting shadows that stretch like reaching hands across the walls, and Machiavelli's voice deepens as he continues. "You must understand something essential," he says. "Human beings are driven by self-interest, by desire, by ambition, by fear. Even the ones who smile at you, even the ones who claim to love you, even the ones who swear they have your best intentions at heart. If you wish to navigate the world with power, you must learn to see these forces not as corruption, but as reality. The nice guy's hand trembles slightly. For the first time, he feels the weight of a philosophy he has spent his whole life avoiding. He thinks of every time he felt resentment burning beneath his politeness, every moment where he felt invisible despite giving everything, every second where he wished to speak up, but swallowed the words because he feared losing approval. He realizes that he has lived as a man who fears disappointing others far more than disappointing himself. Machiavelli circles him the way a mentor circles a student who must unlearn everything. This world, Machiavelli says, is not designed for the man who waits. It is designed for the man who acts, not for the man who seeks permission, but for the man who creates his own path. Not for the man who tries to please everyone, but for the man who understands the value of displeasing the right people. The nice guy breathes sharply. Something breaks, something liberates, something awakens, because deep inside him lives a buried self, the one who remembers what it feels like to want something unapologetically, to dream without shrinking, to desire without guilt, to speak without trembling, to walk into a room without folding himself into something smaller. He remembers moments from childhood when boldness came naturally, when saying no was simple, when boundaries were instinct rather than burden. Somewhere along the way, he learned to silence that self. He learned to be agreeable. He learned to be gentle. He learned to survive by shrinking. But now Machiavelli is not simply giving advice. He is summoning that buried self back into existence. Nice, Machiavelli continues, is not a strategy. It is often an abdication of power. And the world does not reward abdicated power. It consumes it. The room feels heavier now, the air denser, the world outside quieter, as though holding its breath. The nice guy feels every syllable like a blade carving away his illusions. He looks up at Machiavelli, eyes burning with a mixture of fear, anger, clarity, and awakening. "What must I do?" he asks, voice barely audible. Machiavelli smiles, not kindly but knowingly. "You must first understand how you became this way," he replies. "Every man is shaped by forces he does not see. You learned to be nice because you believed niceness kept you safe. You avoided anger because anger made you feel unworthy. You pleased others because it was easier than facing rejection. But now you must ask yourself a new question, one you've avoided your whole life." He leans in so close that the nice guy feels the weight of centuries in his breath. Who are you when you stop begging for permission to exist? The question detonates inside him. It tears through memory, identity, habit, fear, and the soft, fragile layers of the man he has pretended to be. He sees his life flash in pieces, the moments he stayed silent when he should have spoken, the moments he apologized when he should have confronted, the moments he took the blame for problems that were never his, the moments he gave kindness to people who weaponized it. He hears voices from his past telling him to be polite, to be humble, to be agreeable, to be understanding, to be quiet, to be small. Those voices kept him safe, but they also kept him weak. Machiavelli moves to the window, staring out into the darkness beyond. The night feels alive, as though listening. He speaks softly, but the softness contains steel. "You are not required to be cruel, but you are required to be strong. You are not required to be dominant, but you are required to be self-possessed. You are not required to manipulate, but you must never allow yourself to be manipulated. You are not required to be feared, but you must ensure you are not dismissible." The nice guy rises slowly from his chair. Something in him shifts. His shoulders square, his breath deepens, his spine lengthens, as though awakening from a long, suffocating sleep. He looks at Machiavelli not as a student looking up to a master, but as a man who is beginning to reclaim his own reflection. "What happens if I stop being nice?" he asks. Machiavelli turns toward him, eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 lessons carved from the bones of kings. "You do not stop being nice," he says. "You stop being obedient, you stop being passive, you stop abandoning yourself. You stop giving power to those who take advantage of your virtue." He steps closer, voice gaining the gravity of thunder. "You become a man who chooses when to be kind and when not to be. A man who understands that kindness is a weapon only when wielded with intent. A man who knows that power belongs not to those with the biggest heart, but to those with the strongest spine." The room goes silent again. And in that silence, the transformation begins. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, quiet as a knife sliding smoothly from its sheath. The nice guy feels it in the way his breath steadies, in the way his mind sharpens, in the way his fears dissolve like mist, in the way something cold and ancient stirs in his chest. Not cruelty, not malice, but sovereignty. Machiavelli sees the shift and nods. "You are ready," he says. "Ready for what?" The nice guy whispers. "For the 7 truths that will free you," Machiavelli replies. "And they will not make you colder. They will make you whole." The candle burns lower, the shadows lengthen, and the night prepares to reveal its forbidden knowledge as Machiavelli steps forward, ready to deliver the first of 7 dark, transformative lessons that will reshape the nice guy forever. The room darkens further, as though the night itself leans in to listen. Machiavelli. Lee steps away from the window, his silhouette sharp against the faint, trembling candlelight. He studies the nice guy with an expression both analytical and strangely expectant, as if assessing not the man before him, but the man buried beneath him, waiting, watching, ready to surface. "Your transformation begins with truth," Machiavelli says quietly. "Not the truths you were taught, but the truths you were never allowed to hear." He walks slowly, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The nice guy feels the weight of the moment settle over him, heavy and electric, as if the walls themselves know that what comes next will not simply inform him, it will dismantle him. Machiavelli stops in front of him and raises a single finger. "Lesson 1, he says, voice firm, is simple and brutal. People do not reward your goodness. They reward your strength." The words hit with the force of revelation. The nice guy feels something twist inside him, something he has ignored his entire life. He had believed, truly believed, that the world would eventually notice his effort, his loyalty, his patience, his softness. That eventually someone would look at him and say, "You deserve the best because you gave the best." But the world had never said that. The people he loved had never said that. His life had never said that. Instead, it had rewarded the loud, the confident, the decisive, the unapologetic, those who didn't wait for permission to take what they wanted. Machiavelli comes closer. "You have lived in a delusion," he says. "A comforting one, yes, but a delusion nonetheless. You believed that being good was enough, but goodness without strength is invisible." He circles the nice guy as he speaks, each word unraveling another layer of conditioning. "You apologize for taking up space. You over-explain simple truths. You soften your voice to avoid tension. You lower your eyes where someone challenges you. You say yes even when your entire being screams no. You suppress your own needs, your own desires, your own instincts. And for what? To avoid displeasing those who already overlook you?" The nice guy closes his eyes. He can feel his chest tighten with the impact of every sentence. He thinks of the years he spent being understanding with people who never tried to understand him back. He thinks of giving second chances to people who didn't even deserve the first. He thinks of all the moments he swallowed his anger, diluted his truth, wore a mask of calm while storms raged inside him, all in the name of being good. "Do you know what all that kindness earned you?" Machiavelli asks, leaning closer. "Silence, indifference, convenience, at best, pity. Never respect." The words sting because they are painfully true. Machiavelli continues, voice lower now, almost gentle, but only almost. "Nice guys make one fatal mistake. They believe that being liked is the same as being valued. It is not. A child is liked, a servant is liked, a pet is liked. But none of these hold real power. People like what makes their lives easier. They value what makes their lives better." He pauses. "And right now, you make people's lives easier by making your own harder." The nice guy's head drops. His breath trembles. He feels the weight of decades pressing against him, every compromise, every moment he backed away from himself, every instinct he ignored. But Machiavelli lifts his chin with 2 fingers. "Look at me," he says softly. The nice guy meets his gaze. "You are not weak," Machiavelli says. "You are conditioned. There is a difference." A spark flickers inside the nice guy. "But strength," Machiavelli continues, "is not born from being feared. It is born from being self-possessed. It is born from knowing who you are, what you want, what you will allow, and you will never allow again." The nice guy feels something inside him begin to uncoil, a tension that has been there for years, maybe his entire life, A tension built from silence, discomfort, self-denial. Now it cracks open, piece by piece. Machiavelli sees it. Good, he whispers. Now you may begin to understand the second truth. He moves to the table and picks up the candle, holding it between them. The flame flickers wildly, casting moving shadows across Machiavelli's face, making him look ancient and ageless at once. The second truth, he says slowly, is this: your niceness is not kindness. It is fear dressed as virtue. The nice guy's breath catches. But Machiavelli does not soften. You are not gentle because you are noble. You are gentle because you are afraid of conflict. You avoid confrontation not because you are peaceful, but because you fear rejection. You give endlessly not because your heart is overflowing, but because you fear that giving less will cause others to leave. He steps closer. You have spent your life trying not to be a burden, not to be demanding, not to be disappointing, but in doing so, you have made yourself a ghost, present but without presence. The nice guy feels tears sting his eyes, not from sadness but from recognition, from the sudden clarity of seeing himself with brutal honesty. Machiavelli places the candle back on the table. You believe that if you show your anger, people will abandon you. If you show your standards, people will resent you. If you show your desires, people will judge you. So you hide them. You bury them. You pretend you are above them. He shakes his head. But no man is above his own nature. The nice guy swallows hard, tasting the bitterness of truth. People cannot love the man you pretend to be, Machiavelli says, and they cannot respect the man you refuse to become. The rue. M falls silent for a moment, heavy with meaning. Then Machiavelli moves again, pacing slowly, deliberately. You must understand the psychology of fear, for it is the root of your niceness. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of disappointment, fear of not being enough. But these fears do not protect you, they shackle you. He stops and turns back to the nice guy. Fear, he says, is a terrible architect of identity. The nice guy feels something inside him crumble, and something else strengthen. Machiavelli approaches until they stand only inches apart. If you continue living as you are, he says, your life will not be one of peace, it will be one of quiet suffocation. You will lose opportunities, you will lose relationships, you will lose self-respect, you will lose years that should have belonged to you. Machiavelli's voice drops to a whisper. And the world will take from you until there is nothing left but regret. The nice guy feels the truth strike deep, like a hand reaching into his chest and twisting. But then Machiavelli places a hand on his shoulder. But if you choose differently, he says, if you choose strength, if you choose to reclaim what you have abandoned, everything changes. People will treat you differently. They will speak to you differently. They will look at you differently, because you will become different. He lets the words sink in. You will no longer be a man who tries to earn his place in the world. You will be a man who moves as though he already owns it. The transformation within the nice guy grows warmer, brighter, almost dangerous. Good, Machiavelli says again. Now you are ready for the third truth. He steps back and the air seems to tighten. The third truth, he says, is perhaps the most difficult. People test you to find your boundaries. If they find none, they take everything. The nice guy feels a chill run through him, but not from fear, more like awakening. Machiavelli continues speaking, his voice turning sharper, darker, more surgical. Boundaries are not walls, they are mirrors. They show others how to treat you. When you allow disrespect, you teach disrespect. When you reward inconsistency, you teach inconsistency. When you accept crumbs, you teach people to starve you. He steps closer. And when you respond to mistreatment with kindness, you teach people that you do not need to be treated well. The nice guy feels his heart pound. People do not mistreat nice guys because they are evil, Machiavelli says. They mistreat them because nice guys allow it. He sits down, motioning for the nice guy to sit as well. There is a law, Machiavelli says, silent but universal. People push until they meet resistance. And you have offered none. The nice guy closes his eyes, memories flashing like lightning. Moments where he laughed off disrespect, excused betrayals, forgave too quickly, explained too softly. Moments where he thought being understanding made him enlightened, when in reality it made him predictable. And predictable men, Machiavelli says as if reading his mind, are easily controlled. The nice guy opens his eyes, something harder forming within them. Machiavelli smiles faintly. You begin to see, he says. Good, we continue soon. Machiavelli leans back in his chair as though settling into the heart of the storm he himself has summoned. His eyes narrow, studying the internal battle unfolding across the nice guy's face, a lifetime of conditioning clashing violently with the first sparks of self-possession he has allowed himself to feel. The room feels suspended, as if time itself refuses to move forward until the man in front of him rewrites the script he has lived by for decades. "You are beginning to awaken," Machiavelli says quietly. "But awakening is not enough. You must understand how deeply the world reacts to the presence of a boundary." The nice guy swallows. "What do you mean?" Machiavelli's smile is thin, sharp, almost pitying. "Niceness without boundaries," he says, "does not inspire affection, it inspires consumption." He rises again, moving across the room with the restless precision of a strategist solving a battlefield problem. People assess others instantly, instinctively. They look at you and ask one question: how far can I go before he pushes back? He turns sharply. You have lived a life where the answer was always farther. The nice guy flinches, not from insult but from the sting of recognition. Machiavelli sees it and nods. "Every relationship in your life has been shaped by your failure to draw the line. The friends who joke at your expense, the colleagues who hand you extra work because they know you won't refuse, the lovers who know you will never leave no matter how little they give you. Even strangers can sense a man who fears his own voice." He moves closer, voice dropping to a low, cutting murmur. There is something predatory in human nature, not malicious, but instinctive. Just as animals test one another to understand dominance, humans test to understand hierarchy. They test for spine, for firmness, for the presence of self-respect. Every time you remained silent instead of asserting yourself, every time you forgave too quickly, every time you acted as though mistreatment was acceptable, the world learned the same lesson. You are a man with no cost. The nice guy feels a hollow ache in his chest, a sadness he has never given himself permission to feel. He had not realized how deeply he had trained others to undervalue him. He had always believed his patience made him balanced, his forgiveness made him spiritual, his tolerance made him wise. But Machiavelli had torn those illusions apart. "Why do they test me?" he asks, voice small, raw. Machiavelli laughs, not mockingly but knowingly, like a teacher who has heard the same question from 1,000 rulers before. "They test everyone, but only some pass." He sits again. "To understand this," Machiavelli continues, "you must see human nature clearly, not as you wish it to be, but as it is. People test boundaries because they need to understand power. They need to know where they stand. They need to know who can be leaned on, who can be used, who can be relied on, who must be feared, and who must be respected." He gestures toward the nice guy. "You have been placed, voluntarily, into the category of men who can be leaned on indefinitely." The nice guy's jaw tightens. "That's not who I want to be." "Then you must become someone else," Machiavelli replies, "not by force, not by manipulation, but by revelation." He leans forward. When a man changes, the world must be confronted with the new terms of engagement. The nice guy feels something crackle inside him, something sharp, something alive, something he has spent years suppressing. "And that brings us," Machiavelli says, "to the fourth truth." He stands again, slowly, solemnly, as if the next words require a different posture. "You must understand the cold psychology of attraction. Not merely romantic attraction, but human attraction. Respect is a form of attraction. Loyalty is a form of attraction. Fear, admiration, trust, all of these are forms of attraction." He takes a breath, and attraction has a single law. People are drawn not to the nicest option, but to the strongest. The nice guy stiffens. "But I'm not strong." Machiavelli turns abruptly. "That is a lie." The nice guy blinks. Machiavelli steps forward. His face inches from the nice guy's, and for the first time, there is fire in his voice. You are not weak. You are exhausted. You are not fragile. You are restrained. You are not powerless. You are misdirected." He jabs a finger at his chest. "You have endured more than stronger men ever could. You have swallowed your rage. You have weathered neglect. You have tolerated disrespect. You have stood alone in storms that would have broken lesser men. Do not confuse endurance with weakness. You have survived without armor. Imagine what you could do with it." The words ignite something fierce inside the nice guy, a deeper breath, a fuller presence. Machiavelli sees the change. "Yes," he murmurs, "there, that is your spine. That is the man beneath the mask." He circles again. "But understand this. People are not drawn to men who make themselves small. They are drawn to men who know they are not afraid to become large. The nice guy feels the meaning settle over him with the weight of destiny. Strength attracts because it signals certainty. Certainty attracts because it signals safety. Safety attracts because it signals value. This is why you see people gravitate toward the confident, the assertive, the decisive, even when they are not the kindest. These people broadcast something you do not, a sense of self that does not bend with the wind. Machiavelli stops walking. And this brings us to the fifth truth, he says, a truth most nice men discover far too late. He lifts his hand. Your silence has consequences. The nice guy tenses. Machiavelli's voice darkens. You think silence keeps the peace. But silence often creates war. You think silence shows maturity. But silence often shows fear. You think silence protects the relationship. But silence often destroys it. He leans forward. When you fail to express your needs, they do not disappear. They rot, and that rot turns to resentment. That resentment becomes quiet bitterness. That bittern. Becomes emotional distance. And that distance kills relationships. Not loud, not violently, but slowly, subtly, inevitably. The nice guy's breathing quickens. He has felt this before. Felt the bitterness, the anger, the quiet disappointment, the hidden fury. Felt relationships crumble not because he was cruel, but because he was silent. Machiavelli continues. You were taught that silence is noble, but silence is decay. Silence is self-abandonment. Silence is complicity in your own suffering. He steps closer, and people can sense a man who abandons himself. They do not trust him. They do not respect him. They may appreciate the convenience he provides, but they do not invest in him. He pauses. The man who cannot voice his truth is seen as a man who cannot defend it. The nice guy shivers, not from cold but from the sudden clarity of realization. Machiavelli watches him with unwavering intensity. The world listens not to the loudest man, he says, but to the man who knows when to speak. The nice guy nods slowly. I think I'm beginning to understand, he whispers. No, Machiavelli says softly. You are beginning to awaken. Understanding comes next. He returns to his chair, sits, steeples his fingers, and now, he says, we arrive at the sixth truth, the truth that has shaped the destiny of kings, conquerors, leaders, lovers, and every man who ever wished to command respect in this world. His voice drops, slow and heavy. You must become a man who can walk away. The nice guy freezes. Machiavelli continues, voice like steel soaked in fire. You have lived your entire life as if you cannot lose people, as if losing someone is a catastrophe, as if rejection is an apocalypse, as if abandonment is death. He shakes his head. But here is the paradox. The man who fears loss loses everything. The man who does not fear loss gains the world. The nice guy feels something inside him break open, painful, yet freeing. You cling, Machiavelli says, because you believe the world will not offer you better. You tolerate disrespect because you fear the void that follows. You overextend because you fear being alone. You beg silently, not with words but with behavior, for people to stay. He leans closer. But a man becomes truly powerful the moment he realizes he can endure absence. The nice guy whispers, but how? How do I become that man? Machiavelli's answer is immediate. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop bending your boundaries. You stop apologizing for your existence. You stop fearing the departure of those who cannot see your value. He looks the nice guy dead in the eyes. A man who is willing to walk away is a man who has something within him that no one can take. Silence fills the room. Heavy, electrifying, transformative. The nice guy feels a shift. Not loud, not explosive, but deep. He feels like he is stepping into a version of himself he had abandoned long ago. A version that does not cling, does not plead, does not shrink, does not dilute. A version that stands. A version that stays aligned with his own truth, even if the world turns against him. Machiavelli nods. Good, he whispers. Very good. The candle flickers, casting long shadows that stretch like omens across the floor. And now, Machiavelli says slowly, his voice low and final, we arrive at the seventh truth, perhaps the darkest yet the most liberating of all. He steps forward. People only treat you as well as you require them to. The nice guy inhales sharply. Machiavelli continues, the world does not give you what you deserve. It gives you what you demand, not through threats, not through force, but through the undeniable presence of a man who knows who he is. He steps even closer. You do not need to dominate others. You do not need to manipulate them. You simply need to make it clear that you expect to be treated with dignity and that you will not tolerate anything less. The nice guy feels it. The truth, the fear, the awakening, the power. Machiavelli's voice softens but remains sharp as obsidian. Power is not cruelty. Power is not arrogance. Power is not aggression. Power is self-respect expressed consistently. He places a hand on the nice guy's shoulder. You have spent your life being agreeable. Now you must learn to become undeniable. The candle burns lower. The night thickens. And Machiavelli steps back, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of watching a dormant force stir within the man before him. Your old identity is dying, he says calmly. Let it. The nice guy breathes deeply, a breath that feels like the first full breath of his entire life. You tell yourself you are kind. You tell yourself you are patient. You tell yourself you are doing the right thing by waiting for others to see your worth. But in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when the mask of politeness has slipped and the truth crawls out from your ribs like a starving animal, you know exactly what you really feel: resentment, exhaustion, humiliation, invisibility. You were taught to be good, but you were never taught how the world treats the good. And now, every time someone takes advantage of you, every time someone ignores you, every time someone benefits from your softness without offering anything in return, something inside you dies. Not loudly, not dramatically. It dies in small, imperceptible ways, until one day you look at yourself and realize you have become a ghost wearing a smile. This is the point where the Machiavellian path begins, not with arrogance, not with cruelty, not with ambition, but with the realization that being excessively good is not innocence, but a form of self-destruction. The world does not reward the nice man for his morals, it rewards him for his usefulness. That is the first truth you must confront. People love your kindness only when it benefits them, and despise you silently when it demands effort from them. You think you are offering warmth to others, but in their eyes, you are offering yourself as fuel. And so the transformation begins in the shadows, not with violence, but with awareness. Machiavelli never said you must be a villain. He said you must understand villains. You must see how people operate when no one is watching. You must understand what motivates them, what frightens them, what drives their loyalty, and what triggers their betrayal. Because only then do you stop being food. Only then do you stop being prey. Only then do you stop being the harmless tree people carve their names into before walking away without a second thought. The world you live in is not a battlefield of equals. It is a hierarchy built on perception, where people don't respond to your heart but to your presence, your boundaries, your consequences. You believe you earn respect by being accommodating, but in reality, respect is born from selective generosity and controlled detachment. The fewer pieces of yourself you give away, the more valuable each piece becomes. Scarcity is power. Over-availability is death. But nice guys don't understand scarcity. Your instinct is to give more when someone pulls away, to chase when someone withdraws, to soften when someone hardens. You think kindness wins people. But Machiavelli whispers the truth. People want what they fear losing, not what they can easily take. When you shrink to fit inside someone's preferences, you signal that your value is negotiable. When you abandon your own desires to satisfy theirs, you tell them your needs are optional. And when you forgive every disrespect, every delay, every broken promise, they internalize one lesson: you are safe to neglect. The tragedy is that you never meant to fall into this trap. You thought kindness was your strength, but kindness without boundaries is a weapon turned against its owner. So look at your past. Look at all the times you let someone talk over you. Look at all the times you allowed someone to use you because you thought they would someday appreciate you. Look at all the times you swallowed your anger until it fermented into bitterness. That bitterness is not a flaw. It is the birth of awareness, the beginning of power. Machiavelli believed that transformation begins with naming one's weaknesses, and your greatest weakness is your fear of displeasing others. This fear has paralyzed your voice, silenced your ambition, turned your identity into a service. You learned to be agreeable because you believed rejection was lethal, but rejection is merely information. It tells you who cannot walk alongside you. It tells you who deserves no access to you. But because you fear it, you bend, twist, and contort yourself into a shape that feels safe to the world, even as it strangles your inner fire. You cannot rise this way. You cannot be respected this way. You cannot build power this way. So the Machiavellian shift begins with a new question. One darker, deeper, more dangerous. What if you stopped being afraid of being disliked? What if indifference became your armor? What if you allowed people to feel the consequences of disappointing you? What if you dared to disappoint others before disappointing yourself? What if, instead of putting peace above everything, you place self-respect at the throne? Power does not belong to the man who tries to please everyone. It belongs to the man who chooses who is worth pleasing. You have lived your whole life reacting instead of defining. You waited for others to decide your worth. You let them determine how loud your voice could be, how bold your choices could be, how much space you were allowed to occupy. But Machiavelli teaches that authority begins with self-determination. You don't wait for permission to be strong. You declare your strength through action. Imagine a moment, maybe one you've lived 1,000 times, where someone makes a subtle comment that diminishes you, a joke at your expense, a mocking tone, a small dismissal. As a nice guy, you respond with a laugh, a soft reaction, a graceful acceptance, because you don't want to escalate things. But this is how you teach people to treat you. Every time you swallow disrespect, you feed the illusion that you tolerate it. You train your environment to undermine you. And then you wonder why people treat you as though you are replaceable. Machiavelli would say, the moment you tolerate disrespect, you invite it. And the only cure is the terrifying act of drawing a line, clear, cold, and unapologetic, not with anger, not with emotional outbursts, but with unshakable certainty, with calm refusal, with the simple clarity of a man who knows his worth and does not negotiate it. There is nothing cruel about protecting your boundaries. There is cruelty, however, in neglecting yourself to protect the feelings of others. Every time you silence your needs for the sake of harmony, you declare war on yourself. And sooner or later, that war tears you apart. Your body knows it. Your subconscious knows it. This is why your chest tightens when someone interrupts you. Why your stomach twists when you want to speak but don't. Why your mind replays old conversations, imagining what you should have said. That is your inner power begging to be unleashed. People mistake your silence for peace, but it is not peace. It is fear wearing a mask. And fear never leads to greatness. In the shadows of your life, in the private corridors of your psyche, you have dreamed of becoming someone stronger, someone who speaks with authority, someone whose presence shifts a room, someone who doesn't feel small next to loud personalities, someone who doesn't apologize for existing. You imagine being the kind of man whose time is respected, whose opinions matter, whose absence is felt. But you've always believed this transformation requires something you don't have: charisma, confidence, ruthlessness, dominance. Machiavelli would tell you the truth. You already have everything you need. You just haven't weaponized it. Nice guys possess an immense power, empathy, emotional intelligence, patience, qualities that, when sharpened, become lethal strategic tools. The problem is that you use these qualities against yourself. You empathize with those who don't empathize with you. You understand those who don't try to understand you. You give patience to those who exploit it. Your strengths have been inverted. They have been turned outward when they should have first been directed inward. Imagine what happens when a kind man learns to protect his empathy, when he becomes selective with his energy, when he stops explaining himself, when he refuses to justify his boundaries, when he lets silence speak for him, when he gives not from fear but from intent. Suddenly, he becomes unpredictable, attractive, dangerous, respectable. He becomes a man whose presence commands attention not because he demands it, but because he no longer offers it freely. Machiavelli taught that power is perception. People follow the man who appears unshakable, not the one who appears agreeable. But unshakable does not mean cruel. It means rooted in identity, rooted in self-respect, rooted in an internal authority that no external validation can alter. Until now, your identity has depended on the reactions of others. If they approve, you feel worthy. If they disapprove, you shrink. You let the world sculpt you instead of sculpting yourself. It is time to reclaim your shape. But reclamation is not gentle. It is not polite. It is not comfortable. It requires breaking habits that have lived inside you for decades. It requires confronting the parts of yourself that avoid conflict, that panic at the thought of disappointing others, that settle for crumbs because crumbs feel safer than hunger. You must understand this. The fear you feel when you imagine asserting yourself is not a warning sign. It is a sign of captivity, And liberation always feels like danger when you've been trained to be small. People around you will feel the shift when you begin to change. Some will pull away because they can no longer use you. Others will test your resolve, pushing to see if your new boundaries are real or temporary. Some will resent the loss of the compliant version of you. But the ones worth keeping, the ones who see your worth beyond your usefulness, will adapt. They will rise to meet your new standard. And if they don't, then their absence is a blessing dressed as loss. Machiavelli understood human nature deeply. He knew that people adapt quickly to the dynamics of power. Treat someone like you are willing to accept the bare minimum, and they will give you even less with time. But show them that you hold yourself to a higher standard, and they will either elevate their behavior or expose their true intentions. Both outcomes reveal clarity. Clarity is more valuable than comfort. This is the beginning of your reinvention, not as a tyrant, not as a manipulator, but as a man who no longer betrays himself for acceptance. A man who understands that kindness is powerful only when it is voluntary, not when it is extracted through fear or insecurity. A man who chooses his relationships instead of begging for them. A man who speaks when he must, withdraws when he should, and acts with precision rather than desperation. Nice guys are terrified of being alone. Machiavelli would say, "Solitude is the birthplace of authority, because only when you can stand alone do you stop fearing the loss of others. And only then do you become capable of deep connection, not from need, but from choice." There is no greater power than a man who wants nothing from anyone, yet commands respect everywhere he goes. The world does not need you to stop being good, it needs you to stop being easy. And as you step into this new identity, as you feel the tension of becoming someone stronger, understand this: every boundary you enforce is a piece of your soul returning to you. Every demand you make is a fragment of your self-worth restored. Every time you say no without guilt, you reclaim your power. This is not arrogance. This is equilibrium. You are no longer the man who fears displeasing others. You are becoming the man others fear disappointing. And that is where real strength begins. You have felt it before, the quiet rage that simmers beneath your politeness, the heat that coils in your chest whenever someone underestimates you, the cold pulse of frustration when you give your best and receive the bare minimum in return. You bury it because you were trained to. But every suppressed anger returns eventually, growing sharper, heavier, more dangerous. What you call frustration is actually your potential trying to claw its way out of the coffin you built around it. In the Machiavellian world, this is the moment before your ascension, the moment when the old version of you begins to decay and you smell the rot of your former self. The version of you who apologized for everything, who tolerated disrespect, who believed being agreeable was a strategy, who mistook patience for virtue when it was actually paralysis. That man is dying now. And the real you, the one with fire in his bones and iron in his will, is beginning to awaken. But awakening is never peaceful. It begins in chaos, as all transformations do. A man becomes powerful not by learning new things, but by unlearning the illusions T. Hat kept him weak. And your greatest illusion was believing kindness alone ensures loyalty, respect, and connection. You thought your softness would shield you from cruelty. You thought your patience would earn gratitude. You thought your sacrifices would be remembered. But Machiavelli reminds you that people forget kindness quickly, but never strength. The world is not cruel for the sake of cruelty. The world is indifferent. It does not punish the weak deliberately. It simply has no incentive to reward them. This is why you were overlooked. This is why you were replaced. This is why you were tolerated instead of admired. Nice guys are not victims of malice. They are victims of misplaced expectations. You expected fairness from a world that only recognizes leverage. You expected reciprocity from people who only understand consequences. You expected loyalty from those who never feared losing you. But now, something deeper is shifting. You are beginning to understand that power is not about domination or aggression. It is about self-possession. A man who owns himself cannot be controlled. A man who depends emotionally on the opinions of others is already conquered. Niceness, when tainted by dependency, becomes a chain around your throat. Every time you waited for validation, you handed someone else the key to your sense of worth. Every time you held back your opinion to avoid tension, you surrendered a fragment of your voice. Every time you acted smaller to make others comfortable, you carved away pieces of your potential until you could barely recognize yourself. But not anymore. There comes a moment in every man's life when he decides, consciously and without apology, that he will no longer abandon himself to belong to others. This moment marks the birth of true authority, not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet, unshakable presence that turns uncertainty into conviction and hesitation into precision. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He believed a man must cultivate an inner fortress, an internal core that cannot be penetrated by flattery, manipulation, or fear. You have never had a fortress. You have had an open door. Anyone could enter. Anyone could rearrange the furniture of your values. Anyone could demand your time, your energy, your attention. You thought this openness made you lovable. In reality, it made you disposable. People treat an open door as a convenience, not a privilege. They walk in and out as they please, leaving footprints of their carelessness on the floors of your generosity. But now, you begin to close the door, not entirely but intentionally. You begin to control access. You begin to think strategically about who deserves entry and who deserves only a view from the outside. This is not coldness. This is emotional governance, the understanding that your inner world is a kingdom, not a public park. As you evolve, you start to see the subtle games others play. You notice how people ask for favors only when they need something, how they become distant when you need support, how they flatter you when they want your compliance, how they use guilt to manipulate your empathy, how they hide their intentions behind charm, humor, vulnerability, or neediness. The old you would have excused this behavior. The new you observes it with clarity, understanding that people reveal their true selves in the moments they assume you are not paying attention. Machiavellian wisdom teaches that awareness is the first weapon of the powerful. Before you speak differently, you must see differently. And now you do. The illusions have cracked. The fog has lifted. You begin to walk through life with a new kind of vision, noticing patterns and motives you once overlooked. You realize that some people respected your kindness, but most exploited it. Some appreciated your loyalty, but many expected it. Some valued your presence, but most took it for granted because you made it too accessible. This is the part of your journey where the guilt rises, because transformation always begins with guilt before it becomes liberation. You feel guilty for pulling back, guilty for saying no, guilty for valuing your time, guilty for expecting reciprocity, guilty for choosing yourself. But guilt is the residue of your old identity, clinging to your skin like dust. You must wash it off. Guilt is not a signal that you're doing something wrong. It's a signal that you're breaking a pattern that kept you wronged. And slowly, as you assert your boundaries, something fascinating happens. People react. Their reactions reveal everything. Some will respect you more immediately. Some will become angry because they lost control of the narrative. Some will accuse you of being selfish because they benefited from your selflessness. Some will distance themselves because they can no longer extract value from you. These reactions are mirrors, reflecting who truly cared and who only cared as long as you were easy. This is how the world sorts itself around a man who rises, not through dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet reorganization of relationships based on the new rules of your kingdom. And those new rules are simple. I will no longer abandon myself. I will no longer over-explain. I will no longer soften the truth. I will no longer tolerate emotional parasites. I will no longer give twice to someone who gives half. I will no longer sacrifice my peace to maintain an illusion of harmony. Machiavelli believed that a man must learn to operate in two forms, the lion and the fox. The lion for strength, the fox for awareness. You have always been the lamb, too gentle to bite, too trusting to question, too to stand firm. But within you, there has always been a lion sleeping under layers of politeness, a fox hiding beneath layers of trust. Your transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about waking up the parts of you that fear and conditioning put to sleep. You begin to move differently now. You speak less, you observe more, you choose silence over unnecessary explanation. You stop justifying every decision. You no longer chase because chasing is a confession of dependence. You no longer over-communicate because over-communication is a confession of insecurity. You no longer tolerate certain tones, attitudes, or behaviors. Your presence becomes firmer, not loud, not aggressive, but immovable. People feel the difference, even if they cannot articulate it. They sense the shift in your energy, the weight in your gaze, the stillness in your demeanor. They feel that something in you has hardened, not in a cruel way, but in a deliberate way. This hardness is not coldness, it is density. It is the gravity of a man becoming whole. Nice guys live light, airy, unrooted lives, floating from approval to approval, drifting with the expectations of others. But a man who develops gravity becomes unforgettable. He becomes someone others notice when he enters a room. Someone people think twice before disrespecting. Someone whose absence is felt more than the presence of a dozen ordinary men. This gravity comes from one source, internal authority. And internal authority is earned through self-discipline, introspection, and the willingness to face your own shadows. You must confront the parts of yourself that you hid behind kindness, the insecurity that made you seek validation, the fear of conflict, the fear of being alone, the fear of losing people, the fear of disappointing others. These fears controlled your behavior more than your values did. They shaped your personality, your choices, your relationships, your identity. But when you face these fears, when you name them, when you examine their origins, something extraordinary happens. They begin to dissolve. You realize they were ghosts dressed as giants. You realize the pain you feared was survivable. You realize the rejection you avoided was a blessing. You realize the conflict you ran from was the doorway to your self-respect. You realize that people who truly cared would never have vanished simply because you spoke your truth. And then comes the second phase of transformation. Building your standard. This standard is not spoken, it is lived, it is written not in words, but in your silence, your decisions, your posture, your demeanor, your eyes. It is the invisible line that separates the old you from the man you are becoming. Here is the truth. People can sense your standard before they understand it. They feel it through the boundaries you enforce. They feel it through the discomfort you no longer accommodate. They feel it when you no longer smile automatically. They feel it when you no longer rush to fill every silence. They feel it when you stop chasing. They feel it when you leave certain messages unread. They feel it when you refuse to entertain disrespect. You begin to live with a sense of quiet power, not arrogance, not hostility. Power, the kind that comes from knowing you are no longer willing to betray yourself. You do not need to intimidate anyone. Your boundaries do that for you. You do not need to prove anything. Your posture does that for you. You do not need to demand respect, your presence commands it. And as this transformation deepens, you begin to experience the most surprising part of this journey, peace. Not the fragile peace you once sought by pleasing everyone, but a solid, grounded peace that emerges from alignment. You are no longer at war with yourself. You no longer tolerate environments that drain you. You no longer lose sleep over people who never intended to stay. You no longer barter your kindness for connection. You give because you choose to, not because you fear the consequences of withholding. This peace is not stillness, it is control. And when a nice guy learns control, he becomes something the world does not expect, formidable. You are stepping into that territory now, the territory where your voice becomes deeper, not because it tries to, but because it no longer trembles, where your gaze becomes sharper because you see clearly, where your presence becomes heavier because your soul is no longer fractured, where your decisions become firmer because self-respect becomes your compass, where your kindness becomes selective, strategic, and powerful. For the first time in your life, people will notice the difference, and they will adjust or disappear. Both outcomes elevate you. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing. You are no longer waiting to be valued. You are valuing yourself. You are no longer holding back your truth. You are letting it shape your world. You are no longer a nice guy. You are a kind man with boundaries, a strategic thinker with awareness, a calm presence with gravity, a man on the path to power. There comes a point in every man's evolution when he begins to realize that power is not something he must chase. It is something he must cultivate. And cultivation happens not in the spotlight, not in conversations, not in acts of generosity, but in the quiet, unforgiving corners of his mind where all illusions die. You have stepped into that darkness now, the place where every part of you that once begged for approval begins to shed its skin, the place where the old voices, be good, be gentle, be agreeable, be easy, start to sound foreign, almost absurd. Because as your awareness deepens, you begin to see what you could not see before. That niceness, as you practiced it, was not moral superiority, but emotional self-handicapping. You begin to understand that being liked is a prison disguised as a reward. You lived inside that prison for years, decorating its walls, with excuses, rationalizations, and hopeful fantasies. You told yourself people appreciated you. You told yourself your sacrifices mattered. You told yourself loyalty guaranteed reciprocity. You told yourself patience would one day be rewarded. But the truth, cold and sharp as steel, is that your niceness was currency only when others needed it, and worthless when they didn't. Now, as you stand at the edge of your former identity, you realize that power has always been about one thing: controlling the terms of your interactions. You never controlled those terms. You adapted, you adjusted, you yielded. You bent yourself into shape so others would fit comfortably around you. But men who rise do not bend, they shape. They set the temperature of the room. They determine the pace of the conversation. They define what is acceptable and what is not. And they do this not through aggression, not through arrogance, but through the calm, unwavering confidence of someone who no longer fears loss. Loss. The fear that governed every decision you made. The fear that kept you from speaking up. The fear that kept you from asserting yourself. The fear that made you give more than you received. The fear that made you cling to relationships long after they had expired. The fear that convinced you love was something earned by effort rather than something exchanged through mutual respect. But now, Machiavelli's whisper curls around your mind like smoke. A man who fears loss is already owned by others. You begin to understand this. You begin to feel this. And as you internalize it, the fear starts to loosen. Letting go of that fear feels like standing on a cliff, terrifying at first, exhilarating once you realize you will not fall. You begin to walk differently. With every step, the old version of you fades. The man who once sought softness in others now cultivates strength within himself. The man who once begged for acceptance now evaluates those who seek his presence. The man who once apologized for existing now stands tall, shoulders squared with the quiet dignity of someone who finally understands his value. But transformation does not stop at self-respect. That is merely the foundation. What rises from that foundation is something far more potent: strategic awareness. You begin to study people, not to manipulate them, but to understand them so deeply that you remain unmoved by their emotional storms. You start noticing the small things, the shift in someone's tone when they realize they can no longer influence you, the tension in their jaw when you refuse to give them what they expect, the flicker of surprise when your silence carries more authority than your old enthusiasm. And in those moments, you see something profound. People reveal their true intentions only when you stop being easy. There will be those who try to pull you back into your old patterns. They will say you've changed. They will say you've become cold, distant, arrogant. They will say they miss the old you, the one they could emotionally shape like clay. But these accusations are not proof of your failure. They are proof of your growth. People who love the convenience of your weakness will always resist the emergence of your strength. But a man who bows to others loses his crown before he ever wears it. There will also be those who are drawn to you more intensely than before. People admire clarity. They admire confidence. They admire men who stand firmly within themselves. Your SI. Lens becomes a mystery. Your composure becomes charisma. Your boundaries become allure. The respect you were once denied now comes unrequested, not because people suddenly changed, but because you did. You no longer negotiate your worth, and the world adjusts accordingly. You begin to see the dynamics of power everywhere, in relationships, in work, in friendships, in fleeting interactions with strangers. You start recognizing that people follow the man who appears certain, not the one who appears agreeable. You see that the world gravitates towards strength, even quiet strength, especially quiet strength, because silent men with depth unsettle people. They force others to confront themselves. They command attention without requesting it. They shift atmospheres simply by existing. You were never allowed to be this kind of man when you clung to niceness. Niceness filled the space where your authority should have lived. But now that authority begins to sharpen, it is not theatrical, it is not flamboyant, it is not loud. It is forged through solitude, reflection, discipline, and the willingness to walk away. Detachment becomes your new power. Not the cold indifference of a heartless man, but the mastery of one who is no longer chained to external validation. You realize something else too. Your emotions were never the enemy. They were simply misdirected. You gave your compassion to the wrong people. You gave your loyalty to the wrong connections. You gave your patience to the wrong situations. But now, you begin to turn those same emotional strengths inward. Your empathy becomes self-empathy. Your patience becomes patience for your own growth. Your loyalty becomes loyalty to your boundaries. Your love becomes love for your own standards. In this internal realignment, something extraordinary begins to happen. You gain control over your reactions. Machiavelli believed the man who controls his reactions controls his fate. You start noticing the small triggers that once dictated your behavior: guilt, fear, insecurity, the subtle desire to fix others' emotions. But instead of reacting automatically, you pause. That pause is your power. That pause transforms you from a participant in other people's stories into the author of your own. You start speaking with precision. You stop explaining your decisions to those who have not earned that privilege. You refuse to justify your boundaries. You no longer tolerate emotional coercion disguised as vulnerability. The fog lifts from your mind. The weight lifts from your chest. You stop walking on eggshells. You stop performing emotional labor for others. You stop adjusting yourself to avoid conflict. You stop seeking peace outside because you have finally built it inside. This new version of you sees the world without sentimental filters. You understand that every interaction is an exchange of value: emotional, psychological, strategic, or social. You understand that relationships thrive when both sides bring something meaningful to the table, not when one person gives endlessly while the other takes effortlessly. You understand that respect is not something others give. It is something you command through consistency, clarity, and consequences. The final frontier of your transformation. Nice guys avoid consequences because they fear confrontation. Powerful men enforce consequences because they fear nothing but betraying themselves. The moment you start enforcing consequences, not through anger, but through action, you become someone others do not dare to mistreat. You don't yell, you don't argue, you don't demand apologies. You simply withdraw your presence from those who squander it. That silence, that absence, that refusal to engage becomes the loudest statement you could ever mar. Key. And as you step further into this identity, you begin to see yourself differently. You no longer crave approval. You no longer fear solitude. You no longer chase validation. You begin to feel the weight of your own presence. You start to move with intention. You start to live with a sense of quiet inevitability, as though your future is something you shape rather than something you wait for. People sense this inevitability. They sense the difference between a man who is drifting and a man who is becoming. They sense the shift in your energy, your posture, your decisions. They sense your boundaries without you declaring them. They sense your power without you explaining it. They sense your evolution, even if they cannot name it. And in that moment, you become something the world rarely encounters. A man who is both kind and untouchable, compassionate yet unmanipulable, emotionally aware yet emotionally sovereign. A man whose heart is open but whose throne is defended. A man who understands people yet refuses to be controlled by them. A man who can love deeply without losing himself. A man who gives without being drained, leads without shouting, and commands without forcing. You become the man the boy inside you always wished you could be. The man who stands tall not by dominating others, but by refusing to shrink. The man who walks through life with a sense of destiny carved into his expression. The man who has learned the rarest art, the art of self-respect. And as this power settles into your bones, you begin to understand the final truth Machiavelli might have whispered into your ear, if he stood beside you now. The world bends for the man who bends for no one, not out of arrogance, but out of loyalty to himself. And yet, as you stand here on the threshold of the man you once were, and the man you are becoming, you must feel something shifting beneath your ribs. Something dark and honest and long suppressed awakening like a creature released from a cage too small for its bones. Because now the world is no longer an arena in which you hope to be accepted, understood, or appreciated. It is a battleground in which you finally understand the terms of engagement, the currencies of dominance, and the fragile illusions by which most men live and die, without ever seeing the machinery behind the curtain. And as Machiavelli would whisper to you, if he could speak into your ear in this final moment, it is here, at the end of the story of the nice guy, that the true story of power begins. You have been shown betrayal, hesitation, compliance, invisibility. You have watched yourself bow to expectations that never served you, stretch yourself to satisfy demands from people who would never bleed for you, shrink your voice so others could speak comfortably beside your silence. You learned politeness when you should have learned strategy. You learned patience when you should have learned control. You learned softness when you should have learned precision. And perhaps for years, it didn't feel wrong. It felt moral, righteous, admirable, a badge of goodness pinned to your own restraints. But goodness without strength is not virtue. It is vulnerability packaged as identity. And now, in the echoing remnants of everything you've endured, the truth finally stands unveiled. The world does not reward goodness. It rewards value, scarcity, and power. The man who tries to be harmless is eaten. The man who tries to be agreeable is used. The man who tries to avoid hurting anyone eventually becomes the man who is hurt by everyone. The world does not orbit the gentle intentions of the timid. It orbits gravity. And gravity belongs to those who understand force. You must feel it now, the death of the old self, the version of you who apologized when no apol. Ogi was necessary, who explained himself to people who had already decided not to understand, who loved without being asked to be loved back, who waited for permission to live a life that belonged entirely to him. That man cannot come with you. He is a relic of an outdated survival strategy, a ghost built out of childhood fears and adult conditioning. Speak your final goodbye to him, because the next steps you take will have no place for his hesitation. Now your mind sharpens, your chest expands with a strange, cold clarity. You begin to notice the architecture of dominance around you, how people test boundaries without announcing that they are testing, how they speak in suggestions that are actually demands, how they smile with their mouths and attack with their silences, how they search for the person who will say yes too quickly, respond too eagerly, give too freely. And you remember that for too long it was you. You know now that the reason people walked over you was not because they were cruel, but because you trained them to. The reason manipulators chose you was not because you were innocent, but because you were accessible. The reason your generosity was exploited was not because giving is wrong, but because giving without standards is indistinguishable from weakness. But now you feel the reversal inside you, a cold, sovereign steadiness, the birth of something that no longer begs, no longer submits, no longer dilutes itself to be digestible. You have learned the first real lesson of Machiavellian transformation. A man cannot rise until something within him is permitted to harden. Do not misunderstand hardness. It is not cruelty, it is not bitterness, it is not vengeance. Hardness is the refusal to negotiate your worth. Hardness is the refusal to allow emotional blackmail to dictate your decisions. Hardness is the refusal to carry relationships that do not reciprocate your effort. Hardness is the choice to act from strategy rather than from insecurity. Hardness is the cold intelligence that shields you from exploitation. You are not becoming a villain, you're becoming immune. And now that you have risen from the ashes of what you once were, you see the world not as a hopeful dreamer, but as a strategist. Early in your life you assumed people were driven by kindness, empathy, fairness, but now you understand what Machiavelli understood. People are driven by their interests. Their perception of you is a reflection of what you provide or fail to provide. Their loyalty is a currency traded for advantage. Their affection is conditional on your utility. Their respect is conditional on your boundaries. For once, this realization does not wound you, it frees you, because when you stop expecting the world to be gentle with you, you stop suffering. When you stop expecting reciprocity from those who take, you stop bleeding. When you stop expecting loyalty from the disloyal, you stop being betrayed. When you stop expecting fairness from the self-interested, you stop being disappointed. And when you stop expecting validation from those who cannot validate themselves, you become untouchable. This is the core of Machiavellian evolution. You no longer ask the world for permission, you decide how the world will respond to you. And now the air around you shifts, something like danger, something like awakening, something like purpose. Because the man you are becoming is no longer shaped by fear or hope, but by intention. He is not defined by how gently he can behave, but by how effectively he can move through a world that respects neither softness nor innocence. He is not interested in being liked, but in being understood. He is not desperate to be chosen, but grounded enough to choose. He is not waiting to be recognized, but creating conditions that make recognition inevitable. You feel the emergence of a darker virtue, the ability to observe without reacting, to endure without absorbing, to calculate without revealing, to decide without hesitating. You move like someone who understands that the battlefield of life is won not by the loud, or the kind, or the hopeful, but by the strategic. You have begun to master the art of controlled presence, a presence that speaks before you do, a presence that commands without asking, a presence that asserts without explaining. And now you can see the shift in how others look at you. They sense something in the posture of a man who is no longer available for exploitation, something in the silence of a man who no longer offers emotional discounts, something in the eyes of a man who no longer seeks approval in the faces of those who have no authority to grant it, something in the steps of a man who has discovered his own value and refuses to negotiate it. This transformation terrifies people who once benefited from your softness. They will say you've changed. They will say you've become cold. They will say you've lost your kindness, your warmth, your heart. They will call you selfish because you no longer sacrifice yourself for their convenience. They will call you arrogant because you now recognize your worth. They will call you distant because you no longer collapse your boundaries for their comfort. But you will smile inside because at last you understand the complaints of those who once used you are the confirmation of your evolution. Look at yourself now, your mind sharper, your emotions disciplined, your presence heavier. You do not speak as quickly. You do not rush to fill silence. You do not explain unless it is necessary. You do not defend yourself against meaningless accusations. You do not give access to unqualified people. You do not chase. You do not kneel. You do not beg. You do not surrender your peace as a bargaining chip. You operate from a place of power, not need. Machiavelli would tell you that the greatest advantage a man can possess is not ruthlessness, but self-possession. And now, for the first time in your life, you are fully in possession of yourself. Now comes the final lesson, the one most men never learn. Power is not something you acquire, it is something you become. And becoming it requires severing the final chain, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of standing alone, the fear of being judged for your strength, the fear that if you stop being endlessly agreeable, you will lose something. But look at your life. Everything you lost came from being agreeable. Everything that hurt you came from being passive. Everything that drained you came from giving what no one had earned. This is your ascension moment. The moment where the boy dies and the strategist rises. The moment where you step out of the role you were assigned and step into the role you choose. The moment where you stop waiting for opportunities to appear and begin creating conditions that force opportunities to come to you. The moment where you no longer whisper your worth into the darkness, but become the darkness itself, unavoidable, undeniable, unmistakable. And now I will tell you something that very few men ever hear. You are far more capable, far more dangerous, far more powerful than you have allowed yourself to be. Your kindness was never the problem, your lack of bow. Undary's was. Your empathy was never the weakness, your lack of strategy was. Your good heart was never the issue, your fear of unleashing your strength was. The world needs men with good hearts and disciplined minds, not men with good hearts and no defenses. And now you are becoming exactly what the world pretends to fear but secretly respects. A man who is both principled and powerful, both compassionate and calculated, both human and formidable. Do you feel it now? The rising, the ignition, the tightening focus. That is your sovereignty awakening. That is the version of you who cannot be manipulated stepping forward. That is the version of you who is no longer at the mercy of the world but stands above it, observing it with intelligence rather than desperation. That is the version of you who does not kneel to life but commands it. So hear me now, because this is the final truth. The one Machiavelli would carve into your bones if he could. The world does not change when you become nicer. It changes when you become stronger. And this moment right now is the doorway to a new existence. Step through it not as a former nice guy but as a man reborn in strategy, anchored in presence, sharpened in spirit, and unapologetically in control of his destiny. Do not hesitate. Do not look back. Do not let the old self whisper you into comfort. Rise now with a mind that cannot be deceived, a heart that cannot be manipulated, and a presence that cannot be ignored. Stand up, step forward, claim the life you were too afraid to take, because from this moment forward, you do not wait for power. You become it.